Sahana Vavatu, Sahano Bhunaktu, Sahavidyan Karavavahai, Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Good. Welcome to you. Welcome to our webcast of our Saturday morning class on Shankaracharya's Atma Bodha. We're coming towards the end of the class, end of the text, I should say. We begin today with verse 61, towards the end of the topic, knowledge of Brahman. And just to introduce the topic and to remind us of something extremely important, Brahman is not knowable as an object. Brahman is nirguna, nirvishesha, has no qualities, attributes. We know objects through qualities and attributes. That which has no qualities or attributes is unknowable as an object. Do you see the key here? Unknowable as an object, knowable as the subject. The subject, of course, is you, the awareful witness, the knower, the conscious being. So the Brahman, which is the underlying reality because of which the cosmos exists, is ultimately discovered through a process of looking within yourself to one lovely irony. The fundamental reality because of which the vast cosmos exists is discovered not by looking out there, it's discovered by looking within, because that Brahman is ultimately known as your own true nature. Excuse me, which we've discussed before, but just to briefly mention that to introduce our next verse. Repeat after me. Swayamantar bahir vyapya, Swayamantar bahir vyapya, Bhasayan akhilam jagata, Bhasayan akhilam jagata, Brahma prakashate vanhi, Brahma prakashate vanhi, prataptaya sapindavata, prataptaya sapindavata. Excuse me. Start in the third line. Brahma prakashate. Prakashate shines. Brahman shines. If we understand Brahman as the underlying fabric of existence, as we've noted before, not an inert fabric of existence, but a conscious fabric of existence. That which endows everything with satta and spurti. Remember those terms I gave before? Brahman endows everything with satta, existence, and spurti, knownness. Everything gains its existence and knownness from Brahman. Brahman prakashate. Brahman shines as that conscious fabric of existence. Bhasayan, illumining akhilam jagata. Illumining the entire universe. Careful. Brahman does not illumine the entire universe like the sun illumines the earth. Sun is separate, earth is separate. You can't use that image to understand how Brahman illumines the universe. Brahman illumines, as we said before, by endowing everything with spurti, knownness, by introducing consciousness in and through the world. In fact, that's the first line. Bhasayan akhilam jagata. The Brahman shines, illumining the entire world. Vyapya, end of the first line. Vyapya, having pervaded Swayam Vyapya, itself, having pervaded, antar bahihi, within and without. In pervading the universe, antar, within the universe, and bahihi, beyond the universe. Brahman illumines the entire universe, pervading it and extending even beyond. Very lovely language. Now, the key of this verse, of course, is that idea of illumining. We don't think of a fabric of existence as causing illumination, but this is a conscious fabric of existence, the conscious fabric of existence for both you and me, endowing us both with satta, existence, and spurti. In this case, consciousness. We are endowed with consciousness by virtue of the fact that the reality because of which we exist is a conscious reality. Brahman is that conscious reality which gives existence and consciousness to you and me. And then, to make that point very clear, Shankara introduces a famous metaphor that's used in Advaita Vedanta. Vanhi pratapta ayasa pindavat. Take it from end to beginning. Pinda is a lump. Pindavat, like a lump. A lump of what? Ayasa. A lump of iron. A lump of iron which has been pratapta, heated. Heated by what? Vanhi, fire. Like a lump of iron which has been heated by fire. If we lived several hundred years ago, or certainly a thousand or more years ago, like Shankaracharya lived, blacksmiths, iron workers would have been so common. In order to work, in order to shape a piece of iron, you know this, it is heated in a fire. It's heated, actually, furnace we should call it, heated in a furnace until it's glowing red hot or even brighter. Only when that iron is glowing is it capable of being bent into the proper shape. Now the point here is this. Iron shines. That's an odd statement to make, but when that iron is heated, it shines. But the shining nature is not due to the iron, obviously. It's due to the fire. Now, this is a wonderful example to show what happens here with you and me. Body is inert stuff, stula stuff, physical stuff. Mind and senses, etc., is also made of stuff. We distinguished it's made of subtle stuff, sukshma bhutas. But just as the physical body made of physical stuff is inert, insentient, in the same way the mind and senses, being made of subtle stuff, is equally inert, equally insentient. But this body-mind-sense complex gains sentiency due to Brahman. We've said Brahman endows everything with satta, existence, and spurti, consciousness. So the existence of our inert bodies and minds, we attribute that existence to Brahman. And the consciousness that we possess, we also attribute that consciousness to Brahman. Brahman endowing us with satta and spurti. So we can say the existence, the physical existence of our body, mind, and senses, we can attribute to Brahman endowing us with satta, existence, and our consciousness, awareness, we can attribute to Brahman endowing us with that consciousness. There's an important spin-off of this in modern times, in modern neuroscience. There's a debate that's been actually raging for, I think, a couple of 100 years now about what is the source of consciousness. It was a big thing in science today. Is consciousness produced by the brain? Is consciousness produced by electrical activity in the brain? Is consciousness produced by tiny things inside the cells of your brain? There are sophisticated scientific theories for all of that. Of course, all of those theories are problematic, and the scientists themselves admit this. And the problem is, how can matter produce consciousness? We have absolutely no way of understanding that. In fact, on the surface, it's absolutely illogical that matter should produce consciousness. Yet, there are many scientific theories trying to establish exactly that. Here, Shankaracharya's metaphor, he didn't make up the metaphor, it's been around for a long time before Shankara, but this wonderful metaphor makes it so clear that just like iron is not the source of that light that the heated iron emits, the glowing iron, iron is not the source or cause for the glowing. In the same way, your brain, if you look at it from the standpoint of body, your brain is not the source for consciousness, nor is your mind, if we think of it in terms of sukshma sharira. Your sthula sharira, physical body, including brain, is not the source of consciousness, nor is your sukshma sharira, subtle body, the source of consciousness, because both are inert. And we have no way of explaining how consciousness can arise from that which is unconscious, that which is inert, that which is matter. So the explanation then is very clear. Brahman endows the physical body with existence. Brahman endows the subtle body, including your mind, with consciousness. Therefore, you become a conscious, sentient being due to Brahman's presence, just like that iron glows due to the presence of Agni, fire. So fire endows iron with the ability to glow. Brahman endows lumps of flesh with the ability to be conscious beings. Nice metaphor. All right, let's continue. Jagad vilakshanam brahma, Jagad vilakshanam brahma, Brahmanonyanna kinchana, Brahmanonyanna kinchana, Brahmanyadbhati chen mithya, Brahmanyadbhati chen mithya, Yatha marumarichika, Yatha marumarichika. Some very fundamental teachings of Vedanta here. First, Brahma is Jagad Vilakshanam. Brahman is other than the universe. By the way, there's almost a contradiction. It's not a contradiction, but look at the language here. Brahman is Jagad Vilakshanam. Brahman is other than the universe, Jagat. On the other hand, Brahmanaha Anyat, other than Brahman, Nakinchana, nothing exists. Look at those two statements. Brahman is other than the universe. Other than Brahman, nothing exists. How do you possibly make sense out of those two statements? Many of you can answer. The answer is in our very common example. Look at this. Clay is other than the pot. Obviously, Clay is not a pot. But other than clay, nothing exists here. There is no, well, the word Mithya comes in the second half, so let me hold off on that. Here, Puja Swami Dayananda loved this example. He kept saying, he said this so many times. I can hear his voice. He says, clay is pot. Sorry, I just got it backwards. He said, pot is clay. Clay is not pot. Pot is clay. Clay is not pot. He says B is A is not B. You know, for anyone who knows math, that's very confusing. What do you mean? B is A is not B. It doesn't make any sense until you look at this example. Pot is clay. Clay is not pot. Jagat is Brahman. Brahman is not Jagat. That's the understanding. What Shankara is doing in this verse is calling our attention to the difference between form and content, between the apparent world and its underlying substratum, Brahman. With that understanding, it all becomes so clear. So Jagat Vilakshanam Brahma, Brahman, the underlying reality because of which the universe exists, is other than the universe, just as clay is other than a pot. Pot is this form you see in my hand. Clay is different from that form. In the same way, Brahman is the underlying reality because of which this world of names and forms exists, but that Brahman is other than the world. On the other hand, Brahmanaha anyat na kinchana. Nothing exists other than Brahman. There is nothing here other than clay. We've been through this. It becomes really so obvious after you get it. Pretty soon, you won't be able to think about this as a pot at all. You'll only think about it as clay, which is good, which is the truth. We need to distinguish between form and content. Content is the reality. Form is appearance. Correct? Form is an appearance. So different than the underlying reality or content. Then he continues. Brahma anyad bhati chet. Chet, suppose. Brahma anyat bhati, something anyat, other than Brahman. Suppose something other than Brahman bhati appears. If something other than Brahman appears, he says it is Mithya. Anything other than Brahman that appears is Mithya, just like anything other than pot, I'm mixing my words up again, anything other than clay that appears is Mithya. Now, we need to remember our technical definition of Mithya. Mithya has several meanings, both in Sanskrit and vernacular Indian languages. It can also often mean false. We do not use it to mean false or even illusion. We use it, meaning in the teachings of Advaita Vedanta, Mithya is used in a very specific, precise manner. It means that which has dependent existence is Mithya. Adhisthana ananyatvam. That which is when something exists non-separate from its substratum, that thing is Mithya. This pot exists. No one can deny that. But the pot exists only due to its underlying substratum, clay. The pot is non-separate from its underlying substratum. Therefore, we say the pot is Mithya. Just as the pot exists dependent on its underlying substratum, clay, in the same way the universe exists, dependent upon its underlying substratum, Brahman. Pat is the term we've used before, nama rupa. It is name and form. It is a mere appearance as opposed to the clay, which is content. In the same way, this jagat, this entire world, is nama rupa. It is name and form. It is mere appearance, but it appears due to its underlying substratum, Brahman. This is what we mean by Mithya. We want to be very clear about it. Shankara concludes with another famous metaphor. I mentioned in the introduction to this text that almost every verse has a wonderful metaphor. Here he gives an example for Mithya, an example which, by the way, can be misunderstood. So take a look at it carefully. He says, third line, if something other than Brahman appears, like if something other than clay appears, whatever appears other than clay is Mithya. So looking around us, if something other than Brahman appears, whatever appears is Mithya. And now comes the metaphor, yatha maru marichika. Yatha, just like. Maru marichika. Marichika is a mirage. Maru, you might know, is desert. So a mirage that appears in a desert. I guess it's quite common to see near the horizon, you see these wavy lines, probably due to heat, but it makes it look like water. The wavy lines of the heat rising from the ground, that waviness, and you see in the air near the ground, makes it look like water. Of course, there's no water in the desert, but there is the illusion of water, the illusory appearance of water. Now, be careful with this metaphor. The mirage water doesn't exist at all. Can you say that about this pot? You can't say that about it. We use metaphors so much, but we have to be really, really careful with how they use them. So, this verse is not saying that the world is an illusion like a mirage. It is saying the world is mithya, like a mirage. Hear that statement, because this is where we go wrong. Many people will make this mistake. It's easy to make that mistake. This verse does not say that the world is an illusion, like a mirage. This verse does say that the world is mithya, like a mirage. Now, first of all, we cannot say that the world is an illusion any more than we can say that the pot is an illusion. That should be clear. Our understanding of mithya is such that which is mithya is not an illusion. It exists, but it doesn't exist independently. It exists as an appearance. It exists dependently, dependent on an underlying substratum. That's definitely not an illusion. This pot is not an illusion. This world is not an illusion. Then why does Shankaracharya give the metaphor of Maru Marichika, a mirage in the desert? That water doesn't exist, but that's not what he's using the metaphor to show. What he's using the metaphor to show is what you see, right? When I say that, I'm pausing, and I apologize. In the world of engineering, when you're using displays, like LED displays, in software, they used to talk about what you see is what you get. So the software engineers would use that to describe a very realistic representation of something on a computer screen. What you see is what you get. Here, this metaphor shows the opposite. What you see is not what you get. You see water, but there's no water. That's the point. You see water, but there's no water. You see pot, but there's no pot. Pot is not an object, it's an appearance, it's nama rupa. If you take the clay apart, if you take the clay away, show me this pot. Take this pot, remove the clay, and show me what's left. Nothing's left. There's no pot. So just as when you see water in the desert, there's no water. When you see this pot, there's no pot. Strictly speaking, there is no pot. It's only clay. Clay and nothing but clay. You show me anything here in addition to clay. Nama rupa are not things. Name and form are not things. They're ideas, not things. The only thing here is clay. There is no thing called pot. There is an appearance called pot. That's what Shankara uses the word mithya to mean, and that's the sense in which he is using this metaphor. When you see water in a desert, there's no water. When you see the pot, there's no pot. When you see the world around you, there's no world. There's no object pot, there's only clay. There's no object world, there's only Brahman. Now you get it. This really shows the problem of experience. We've discussed this several times. Experience does not prove anything to be real. We've observed so many times how experience can be misleading. Certainly in the desert, your experience of water is wrong. Not wrong. Experience is neither right or wrong. Experience is what it is. You experience what looks like water, but it's not water. Experiences get misinterpreted, as we've discussed at great length. Your experience of the mirage gets misinterpreted. Your experience of the pot gets misinterpreted. Your experience of the world gets misinterpreted. And this verse gets misinterpreted. It gets misinterpreted when people misunderstand Shankara and misunderstand Shankara to say that the world is an illusion. Absolutely incorrect. The world is no more an illusion than this pot. On the other hand, this pot is nothing but clay, and the world is nothing but Brahman. Okay, clear enough. Then. Drishyate shruyate yadyata, drishyate shruyate yadyata, brahmanonyanna tad bhavet, brahmanonyanna tad bhavet, tattvajnanacha tad brahma, tattvajnanacha tad brahma, satchidanandamadvayam, satchidanandamadvayam. Yat, whatever, whatever is drishyate, anything that is seen, shruyate, anything that is heard, we can extend that, anything that is touched, anything that is smelled, anything that is tasted, anything that you experience with your five senses, Drishyate, shruyate, yat yat. Anything external that you experience, brahmanaha anyat, other than Brahman, na bhavet. There is nothing other than Brahman that you can see, hear, taste, smell, or touch. There is nothing other than Brahman. To use the American expression, Shankaracharya is hammering away at the problem of experience. What you see is not what you get. That's his point here. He says, drishyate yat yat. Whatever you see is Brahman and nothing else. But you don't see Brahman with your eyes. You see a pot. You see the world. So here's what we just got done saying. Whatever you experience is subject to misinterpretation, like the maru marichika, like the mirage water in a desert. Whatever you experience, whatever you see, hear, smell, taste, or touch, it's all subject to misinterpretation. Therefore, whatever we experience must be very carefully and properly interpreted. So here, you experience a pot. Fine. But that experience has to be properly interpreted. In the same way, we experience the world. We experience our bodies. We experience our minds. But all of those experiences are subject to misinterpretation. All of those experiences must be properly interpreted with the help of these Vedantic teachings. And with the help of these teachings, we come to understand that everything we experience is mere appearance, nama and rupa. Just as this pot is a mere appearance, the entire world that we experience, everything, is a mere appearance. And then on analysis, this is where the interpretation comes in. You experience the pot, and now comes the proper interpretation. The pot is mere appearance. Its appearance depends on the underlying substratum of clay. There you have the proper interpretation of the experience of pot. Similarly for the world, we experience everything, including our own bodies and minds. But to properly interpret that experience is to understand it to be an appearance of the world, an appearance of your body. Appearance means what you experience. The appearance is usually we think of it just in terms of what you see. But again, we want to extend it to all 5 senses. So everything you see, hear, smell, taste, or touch exists due to 2 parts. Everything you see, hear, smell, taste, or touch is not an independently existing thing or reality. Everything you see, hear, smell, taste, or touch presents itself to you in your experience, but it's able to do so only because of its underlying substratum, Brahman. Without that underlying substratum, Brahman, nothing could present itself to you to be seen, heard, smelled, tasted, or touched. Okay, then he concludes. By the way, this concludes the section on knowledge of Brahman. Tattva-jnanat cha tad-brahm, tattva-jnanat cha and tattva-jnanat, from knowledge of reality, tat brahma, that Brahman, that underlying substratum, that conscious fabric of existence, is discovered to be what? Satchidanandam Advayam. Now, Satchitananda, you know that expression very well. It's a term we use to refer to Atma. This is the culmination of the teachings of Vedanta, where Tattvajnanat, due to knowledge of reality, the ultimate knowledge, Brahmajnanam, knowledge of the absolute truth, knowledge of the final absolute truth, that knowledge leads you to discover that Tat Brahma, that Brahman, which is the conscious fabric of existence, because of which everything exists, that Brahman is recognized how? As Sat Chit Anandam, as your own true self, as the consciousness that's present right now in this experience, the consciousness which you might think is ordinary, but the consciousness that the rishis discovered to be extraordinary. The consciousness which is unborn, uncreated. The consciousness which is boundaryless, limitless, all-pervasive. The consciousness which is utterly unaffected by anything in the world, anything in your body, anything in your mind, the consciousness which remains pure and untainted in all situations. That consciousness is Satchidanandam. That consciousness is Advayam, non-dual. How can your consciousness be non-dual? Well, two ways. One way we've discussed many times is how there cannot be many consciousnesses. There is but one, and there cannot be many consciousnesses because consciousness doesn't have size, doesn't have limits, doesn't have an edge, doesn't have a boundary. Your consciousness has no edge or boundary. My consciousness has no edge or boundary. We've had this discussion several times in the past. There is but one all-pervasive consciousness. So in that way, we have this word advayam. Advayam means non-dual. Advaita and advayam are synonyms. They both mean non-dual. But be careful here. If you just say that your consciousness and my consciousness is the same consciousness, that doesn't rule out the possibility of duality. Because there could indeed be one limitless consciousness, but that one limitless consciousness could be separate from matter, separate from the world. That's duality. Two kinds of duality. One duality is between your consciousness and my consciousness. We can dismiss that duality. But there's another duality. Duality between chit and jada, between sentient and insentient, between consciousness and matter. That duality also has to be resolved. How do we resolve that duality? By saying that Brahman is the one conscious fabric of existence, of reality, because of which everything exists. There is only Brahman. And then Chandogya Upanishad, Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma. Sarvam idam, all this, kalu, indeed. Sarvam kalvidam, all this indeed is Brahman and nothing but Brahman. So duality is ultimately removed when you discover everything to be that conscious fabric of existence which we call Brahman. That means your body exists because of Brahman, being given its satta, its existence by Brahman. Your mind and senses, sukshma sharira, exists because of Brahman. Brahman giving satta, existence, to your subtle body. Your awareness, consciousness, exists because of Brahman. Brahman blessing you with spurti, that consciousness. And then shifting our view outside, the entire cosmos is given satta and spurti by the same Brahman. That Brahman is the fabric of existence because of which you and I exist, is the same fabric of existence because of which everything exists. There is but one conscious fabric of existence, that is Brahman, and that Brahman is Advayam, non-dual. Good. And that concludes the penultimate subject matter in this text, Atma Bodha, knowledge of Brahman, leading us to the concluding section. There's just a few verses left, 4 verses left. I guess we'll see one more verse today, but then we'll conclude in the next class. The last topic is enlightenment, and you'll see that these final verses give a nice conclusion to this whole text on Atma Bodha. Let's see this. Let's see just this one verse. Sarvagam Satchidatmanam Sarvagam Satchidatmanam Jnana Chakshur Nirikshate Jnana Chakshur Nirikshate Ajnana Chakshur Neksheta Ajnana Chakshur Neksheta Bhaswantam Bhanamandavata Bhaswantam Bhanamandavata. So our topic now is enlightenment, and you remember from many prior discussions, enlightenment is the acquisition of Atma Bodha. Enlightenment means gaining knowledge. Liberation is gaining knowledge. Shankara is famous for the saying, Jnanameva mokshaha. Moksha is nothing but gaining this ultimate knowledge of your true nature, Atma Bodha. And he explains that here. He says, in the second line, Jnana Chakshuhu, lovely expression that's used in the Bhagavad Gita and elsewhere. Chakshus is eye, Jnana Chakshus, the eye of knowledge, the eye of wisdom. And this is actually an expression used in a very particular way. Your physical eyes is a means of knowledge. We call it a pramana. I don't know that we've used this word previously in our studies here. Maybe we have. Pramana is a means of knowledge. Your eyes are a pramana for seeing form and color. Your ears are a pramana for hearing sounds. Your skin is a pramana for feeling textures. Your tongue is a pramana for taste. Your nose is a pramana for smell. Pramana is a means of knowledge. With the help of a pramana, you gain knowledge. You gain knowledge of my sitting here and teaching because of your pramana in the form of sight. So our 5 senses are pramanas through which we gain knowledge of the world around you. So here he's using an interesting expression, jnana chakshus. So chakshus here means eye, but by implication, pramana. Jnana pramana, a pramana which yields jnanam. And actually that compound didn't work, so I'm going to set that aside. Chakshus here does indicate pramana, but you have to stay with the expression, the eye of wisdom. The eye of wisdom is a different kind of pramana. Your physical eye is one kind of pramana. The eye of wisdom is another kind of pramana. What do you mean by jnana chakshus, eye of wisdom? Do you know that's a poetic way for describing the teachings of Vedanta? Honestly, jnana chakshus, the eye of wisdom, is a highly poetic way of describing these teachings of the ancient rishis, the teachings which are a pramana, a means of knowledge to lead you to discover the ultimate truth of the universe and the truth of yourself. The point here is that teachings, the teachings of Vedanta, are a pramana, a means of knowledge, highly significant. Let's see the verse, the first half of the verse, and then I want to talk further about the significance of that. So, jnana chakshus, with the eye of wisdom, ikshate, one can see. Actually, literally, the jnana chakshus ikshate, the eye of wisdom itself sees. Nirikshate. By the way, I've incorrectly translated this in a passive voice. It's not passive, it's active. The eye of wisdom sees or reveals. Sees or reveals what? Sarvagam satchidatmanam. It reveals Satchidatma, your true self, which is Sat, unborn, uncreated, and Chit, consciousness, which is Sarvagam, all-pervasive, limitless. That's where the word Ananda usually comes in. So your true nature as unborn, uncreated, boundaryless, limitless consciousness, that true nature, jnana chakshusikshate, you see it with the eye of wisdom. It is revealed by the eye of wisdom. What does it mean to be revealed by the eye of wisdom? That's what I said before. It is understood with the teachings of Vedanta, which contains the wisdom of the ancient rishis. So what the ancient rishis discovered, they passed on to us in the form of these teachings. These teachings, this body of teachings, constitutes a pramana, a valid means of knowledge for discovering your true nature and the reality of the cosmos. The best way, you might not be used to thinking of a teaching as being a pramana. So let me make that clear. There is a technical discussion, which we're not going to get into, in which Advaita Vedanta distinguishes 6 different kinds of pramanas. We're definitely not going to discuss that here. One of the 6 actually we've discussed, perception. But now we're perception, what you see, your eyes, ears, nose, etc., they together form a pramana, a valid means of knowledge. We call it pratyaksha pramana, a pramana in the form of sense perception. That is one of 6 pramanas accepted in Advaita Vedanta. We'll skip 4 of them and come to one that we definitely want to discuss here, which is called Shabda Pramana. Shabda Pramana means a pramana, a valid means of knowledge, in the form of Shabda, words, in the form of teachings. Now, to make it very clear how words can give knowledge, there's a famous example. Shankara doesn't give the example here, but it's often used to explain Shabda Pramana. The story is about someone who had an old friend. You have an old friend. So this old friend had a name. His name was Devadatta. The common, like Mr. Smith in English. So what's Mr. Smith in English is Devadatta in Sanskrit. So Devadatta was known to this person many, many years ago. But this person hasn't seen Devadatta for decades. And one day, this person is introduced to Devadatta, who he knew decades ago. The person who's introducing says, "This this is the same Devadatta that you knew decades ago. The Devadatta that you knew decades ago is this Devadatta standing before you right now. That statement, this is that Devadatta. In Sanskrit, Soyam Devadatta. This is that Devadatta. Those are three words that convey a very special kind of knowledge. Look at this. The person knew Devadatta decades ago, and now the person is standing with Devadatta in front of them. But they don't recognize this Devadatta as being the same one that they knew decades ago. Consider this. They have the full and complete experience of Devadatta, but because of ignorance, they don't know that this Devadatta that they're experiencing right now is the same as the Devadatta they knew decades ago. Let me just show you where this metaphor connects. Devadatta is, in a present moment, Devadatta is experienced but not recognized, right? Devadatta is experienced but not recognized as the same Devadatta he knew decades ago. In the same way, consciousness is present in your experience right now, but that consciousness might not be recognized as being unborn, uncreated, boundaryless, limitless, etc., etc., etc. So Devadatta is experienced but not recognized for who he truly is. Consciousness is present in your experience right now, but perhaps not recognized for what it truly is. So in order for this fellow to know Devadatta, a third person has to say, this is that Devadatta. This Devadatta standing before you now is the same Devadatta that you knew decades ago. That person is in the role of guru. So just as he needed a guru to know that this is that Devadatta, in the same way, to know that the consciousness present in your experience right now is actually boundaryless, limitless, vast, you need a guru, you need a teaching, you need a pramana, a valid means of knowledge. So, in the example, the statement, this is that Devadatta, that's a statement. A special kind of statement that is a valid means of knowledge. That statement is a pramana. That statement is an example of Shabda pramana. Similarly, in Advaita Vedanta, we have a parallel statement. The parallel statement to Soyam Devadatta, this is that Devadatta, the parallel statement is Tat Tvamasi. This conscious being that you are is identical to that Brahman, and Tat Tvamasi then is a statement that conveys knowledge. That statement is a pramana, a valid means of knowledge. And with that statement, you gain knowledge. And this is a metaphor. So jnana chakshus refers to that statement, tat tvamasi. And because of that statement, which is a pramana, a means of valid knowledge, because of that nirikshate, you see, you discover sarvagam satchidatmanam, you discover your true nature to be Satchidananda. So this is introducing this final section of the text on enlightenment. In order to get enlightened, ignorance of your true nature, remember, we've said your true nature is already present here and now, covered, partially covered, remember all these discussions. Your true nature is present now in this experience, in this ordinary experience. Satchidananda Atma is present, but partially covered by ignorance. In order to remove ignorance, you need a pramana, a means of valid knowledge. In this case, the pramana is the teachings of Vedanta, in particular, Tattvamasi. So the words of Vedanta, like Tattvamasi, impart knowledge, destroying the veil of ignorance, resulting in enlightenment. On the other hand, if you don't have a pramana, if you didn't have eyes, you couldn't see me. If you don't have ears, you can't hear me. In the absence of a pramana, you have no means of knowledge. Here the pramana we're talking about is the teachings of Vedanta. So ajnana chakshuhu. Oh, that's what it is. For our Sanskrit students, jnana chakshur is a bahuvrihi samasa. It means one who possesses eyes of wisdom. So here's a proper translation. This translation I have in the handout, if you have these slides. It's inaccurate. The proper translation, jnana chakshur nirikshate, one with the eye of wisdom, nirikshate, sees, discovers what? Sarvagam satchidatmanam, the all-pervasive self. Down below, ajnana chakshu, who is also a bahuvrihi samasa, it means one who doesn't have this eye of wisdom. So if you don't have a physical eyes, you can't see form and color. If you don't have jnana chakshus, if you don't have the eye of wisdom, if you don't have the teachings of Vedanta, then what? Na iksheta, breaking the words apart. Na iksheta, one would not see, one is unable to see or discover. Go back to the top line, sarvagam satchidatmanam. If you have the eye of wisdom, if you have the teachings of Vedanta, which is a pramana, a means of knowledge, you can gain knowledge of your true self. But if you are ajnana chakshus, if you lack the eye of wisdom, if you don't have the teachings of Vedanta, na iksheta, one cannot make that discovery. And Shankara concludes here with a very wonderful metaphor. It says, andavat bhaswantam bhanam. So andha, you might know as someone who's blind. Andhavat, like one who is blind, can na iksheta, you have to bring that part down into the drishtanta. One who is blind, na iksheta, cannot see bhaswantam bhanum. Bhanum is one of the many words for sun, Surya. Bhaswantam, shining. The shining sun cannot be seen by one who is blind. Notice the sun goes on shining. But in order to see the shining sun, you need this chakshus. You need eyes. You need a functioning eye. In the same way, consciousness is shining. Like the sun goes on shining, that's the metaphor. Like the sun is constantly shining, consciousness is constantly shining. But one who is blind, one who lacks this chakshus, this physical eye, one who lacks the power of sight, one who lacks the pramana, pratyaksha pramana, sense perception. One who lacks the power of sight, that pramana, cannot see the sun even though the sun is shining brightly. In the same way, one who lacks the teachings of Vedanta, which is Shabda Pramana, a means of knowledge in the form of words. One who lacks that pramana cannot discover the true nature of consciousness. Even though consciousness is shining, its true nature can't be discovered. Even though the sun is shining, it's true, it cannot be seen by the blind. Even though consciousness is shining, so to speak, it cannot be understood as it truly is without the teachings of Vedanta, which is a pramana, a means of knowledge. So with this verse, Shankaracharya introduces the final topic of the text. We'll finish the text in the next class, and we'll conclude here. Om sarve bhavantu sukhinaha, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhaveta, asato ma sadgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityorma amritangamaya. Om shanti shanti shanti. Om Tat Sat.